Welcome to E-Bible Fellowship's Bible Study. In this series of Bible studies, we'll be taking a closer look at the Bible's evidence for the completion of the prolonged Judgment Day and the end of the world occurring in the year 2033. And now here's your host and Bible teacher, Chris McCann.
Hello and welcome to E-Bible Fellowship's Bible study in the book of Jonah. This is study number 26 in Jonah chapter 1, and this is part of our ongoing series for the biblical evidence for the end in the year 2033. And I'm going to begin reading in verse 4 of Jonah chapter 1. But Jehovah sent out a great wind into the sea. There was a mighty tempest in the sea, so that the ship was like to be broken. Then the mariners were afraid, and cried every man unto his God, and cast forth the wares that were in the ship into the sea, to lighten it of them. But Jonah was gone down into the sides of the ship, and he lay and was fast asleep. So the shipmaster came to him, and said unto him, What meanest thou, O sleeper? Arise, call upon thy God, if so be that God will think upon us, that we perish not. And I'll stop reading there. Well, we've discussed the various pictures that God is painting, right from the fact that Jonah came from Gath-Hepher, if you remember, if you've been following this, and we pointed out how that was the winepress of the dig or dug pit, and it identified with hell, the wrath of God, and so he arose from there to go to Tarshish, because it's teaching us that Christ died for the sins of his people before he entered into the world. And when Jonah flee or goes to is commanded to go to Nineveh, and he rose up to flee unto Tarshish from the presence of Jehovah. We've talked about that phrase, from the presence of Jehovah, how it ties in with Adam and Eve. Right after they sin, they go from the presence of Jehovah, word for word. And so that's Christ entering into the human race, going with them. As Jonah gets on board the ship, he's going with them from the presence of Jehovah. That's the direction of mankind. We also saw that when he paid the fare, and we looked up that word, it's the word price, and in Zechariah 11, that very definitely ties into the atonement price that the Lord Jesus Christ paid. And so even in paying the fare to get on board the ship, God is indicating, well, the price was already paid before Jonah enters into the ship to go with them from the presence of Jehovah. Before Christ entered the human race, he already paid the penalty, which is death, for the sins of his chosen people. And that's why he's the lamb slain from the foundation of the world. Well, we're going to find once more, as the tempest comes upon the sea, the Lord sends the wind, stirs up the sea, and there's a storm at sea, where it's a very bad storm to the point the ship is like to be broken. But it's not actually broken, and we've talked about that. Then the mariners were afraid, and in our last study, we discussed the word mariners and its relationship to the word salt. It is actually the word salt, and God's people are the salt of the earth. So the mariners are the salt. And you could take that verse in the New Testament, ye are the salt of the earth, you're the mariners of the earth. But here the mariners were afraid, and cried every man unto his God, and cast forth the wares that were in the ship into the sea, to lighten it of them. But Jonah was gone down into the sides of the ship, and he lay and was fast asleep. We're going to find with this language another similar picture as coming from Gath Hefer, as paying the fare. The similar picture as a few verses from here, when the mariners will cast him overboard and he'll be swallowed by the whale. Again and again and again, God is illustrating and painting that picture of the atonement. And so with this statement, but Jonah was gone down into the sides of the ship. Again, Jonah, here, a type of Christ, gone down into the sides of the ship. Now, we find that the word, Hebrew word translated gone down, and the Hebrew word translated sides, these two words are found together in Ezekiel 32, in a passage over in Ezekiel 32, and starting in verse 22, it says, Asher is there and all her company. His graves are about him, all of them slain, fallen by the sword, whose graves are set in the sides of the pit. And that's the word. He went down into the side of the ship. So here, whose graves are set in the sides of the pit, and her company is round about her grave, all of them slain, fallen by the sword, which caused terror in the land of the living. There is Elam and all her multitude round about her grave, all of them slain, fallen by the sword, which are gone down uncircumcised into the nether parts of the earth, which caused their terror in the land of the living. Yet have they borne their shame with them that go down to the pit. So gone down to the pit, sides of the pit. It's pointing to death and hell, and that is the penalty. That is what the law demands for sin. Death. The wages of sin is death. Jonah is gone down into the side of the ship, and so it's pointing to Christ, who is going down to hell. He's going to the grave. He's going to die as he enters into the world, as he was born of the Virgin and began his ministry, eventually goes to the cross. What does he do on the cross? He dies. Or actually, he began to die, a spiritual death, in the Garden of Gethsemane. And he was in an agony. Great drops of sweat as blood was falling from him. He was about a stone's cast away, because it was pointing to the fact that he was being stoned, as it were, in order to make manifest the payment he had made for the sins of his people. Well, you might ask the question, okay, but that's gone down into the sides of the pit, into the grave, into hell. But Jonah's gone down into the ship. The ship's not hell. Well, just consider. I just mentioned that Christ began to suffer Thursday night in the garden, and Jesus said, as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth, or nether parts of the earth. And he began to suffer and cry out to God, may the cup pass from me, and which indicates he was drinking of the cup. And what does that cup represent? The wrath of God in the garden Thursday evening. and then he'll be taken, go before the Jewish council, turned over to Pilate, eventually crucified. And Thursday night, Friday night, Saturday night, the 3 nights, Friday, Saturday, early Sunday morning, he rises on the third day, 3 days and 3 nights, that he's suffering the wrath of God, not paying for sins, but making manifest the fact that he had already paid for sins at the foundation of the world. And his suffering, where did it take place? Where was the Garden of Gethsemane? It was in Israel. Where was the Lord crucified? Outside the gates of Jerusalem, which is in Israel. And keep in mind, we spent some studies going over the fact God speaks of the Israel and the church as 2 vineyards. One, Israel had its vineyard transferred to the church. The second, the church had its vineyard destroyed. Likewise, God also speaks of them as 2 ships. And one ship, Israel, like to be broken due to the force of the waves, but isn't actually broken. The second ship, the New Testament corporate church, in Acts 27, also faces the violence of the waves and has its hinder part broken. And we'll look a bit more at that, because it is significant when we are able to go to the New Testament to look at some similar passages where Christ himself goes into a ship and a storm at sea arises. And in one place, it says he's in the hinder part. And then in Acts 27, it's the hinder part of the ship that's broken. But here first, we can understand Jonah, type of Christ, has gone down into the sides of the ship, because the ship is representing Israel. Christ suffered the wrath of God within the land of Israel. He came into the world born of Mary and born a Jew. And so that would be how we understand this, that he goes into the sides of the ship and he lay. Now, the Hebrew word translated as lay is another interesting word that itself is translated as slept many times. Now it's also translated lay or laid and that kind of a thing, but it's translated as slept many times. So he went down into the sides of the ship and he slept and was fast asleep. And fast asleep's a different word. We'll look at that. Hopefully we'll have time. But as far as lay, it's Strong's number 7901. And we'll just look at 3 places. 1 Kings 11 and verse 43 concerning Solomon. It says, "And Solomon slept with his fathers and was buried in the city of David his father, and Rehoboam his son reigned in his stead." The word slept. Solomon lay with his fathers. Yeah, you could say that, but God allowed the translators to translate this as slept. Also, in 1 Kings 14, verse 31, "And Rehoboam slept with his fathers and was buried with his fathers in the city of David." Same thing. And 1 Kings 15, next chapter, verse 8, "And Abijam slept with his fathers, and they buried him in the city of David, and Asa his son reigned in his stead." So it's practically all the kings. I could go on, but I think we get the point. And that's the spiritual picture that really is in view when Jonah goes down, Ezekiel 32, down into the pit, down into the grave, into death. And he slept, pointing to the fact that the Lord Jesus died. And it goes on to say in Jonah 1, he was fast asleep. Jonah 1, the end of verse 5, Jonah was gone down into the sides of the ship, and he slept and was fast asleep. Now this, the two words fast asleep are translation of one Hebrew word we find in Judges chapter 4. Judges 4. And this is going to tell us about Sisera, who is a spiritual picture of Satan, and Jael, Heber's wife, who took the nail of the tent and with a workman's hammer, she hammered the nail into his temple. And we read in Judges 4, verse 21, then Jael, Heber's wife, took a nail of the tent and took a hammer in her hand and went softly upon unto him and smote the nail into his temples and fastened it into the ground, for he was fast asleep and weary, so he died. Now here, his sleep wasn't actually death. It led to his death. God ties it to his death. He was fast asleep, weary, and he died. He died. Over in Psalm 76, we find this same word translated also as two words, but slightly in a slightly different way. Psalm 76, verse 6, at thy rebuke, O God of Jacob, both the chariot and horse are cast into a dead sleep. A dead sleep. And that's the same, again, a translation of the same word in Jonah. And so we could take that and substitute over here in Jonah 1. Jonah was going down into the sides of the ship, and he slept and was in a dead sleep. In a dead sleep. And again, we understand the Lord is consistently repeating himself. Again, the whole idea of pictures in a portrait gallery. Sometimes it's one verse where you get one picture. You could have one picture in a whole chapter. Sometimes you're getting various pictures, like you're going from portrait to portrait to portrait, and you're taking in all the elements of this picture, and you move on, and it's written or painted by the same artist, and he has a particular theme. So you look at that one, and then you go to the next, and it's a different picture, same theme in this chapter, the atonement, the death of the Lord Jesus Christ. Okay, let's go to the New Testament, and we'll take a look at Christ entering into a ship, and I believe there are at least three accounts, three of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, where Christ is in a ship. There's a storm at sea, and he rises up and calms the sea, and there's a great calm. It's a little more complicated because there's another account in a few of the Gospels where, curiously, the disciples go into the ship before him, and they're sailing to the other side. It's always to the other side, and as they're sailing, a storm arises, and then Jesus, in the evening, he begins to walk upon the sea, and um, and that's when Peter comes out of the ship and momentarily also walks on the sea and begins to sink. And then when Christ enters into the ship, um, that's when the sea becomes calm. And in one place, once he enters into the ship, it says immediately they were at the land. I don't understand that, but just to get it straight, you know, if you're going to look at this, kind of put those scriptures on one side and the scriptures where Christ is in the ship and the storm is arising and he's asleep. That's the one that has, great similarity to Jonah chapter 1. And here in Matthew 8, we read starting in verse 23. Well, verse 23. And when he was entered into a ship, his disciples followed him, and behold, there arose a great tempest in the sea, insomuch that the ship was covered with the waves, but he was asleep. And by the way, the word tempest here is translated as earthquake in Revelation 11, verse 13. So, it definitely indicates enormous uproar of the sea, enormous uproar of the sea. There was a great tempest, and again, that could be read great earthquake in the sea, insomuch that the ship was covered with the waves, but he was asleep. And his disciples came to him and awoke him, saying, Lord, save us, we perish. And he saith unto them, Why are ye fearful, O ye of little faith? Then he arose and rebuked the winds and the sea, and there was a great calm. But the men marveled, saying, What manner of man is this, that even the winds and the sea obey him? And when he was come to the other side into the country of the Gergesenes, there met him two possessed with devils, coming out of the tombs, exceeding fierce, so that no man might pass by that way. All right, we're not going to have time to get into this in this study. Lord willing, next time we'll look at Matthew 8. We'll look at I think it's also Mark 4 and maybe Luke 8. I believe it's Luke 8. These are parallel accounts. They use different words. Different words are helpful to teach us and show us what God has in view with this. And in each account, they're going to the other side. The other side is the land or the country of the Gergesenes or the Gadarenes, where the man with legion is found. So after quieting the storm at sea, they make it to the other side. Jesus encounters this man. First, we read there's two of them, and then he casts out the devils that are legion. Following that, the legion of devils enter into about 2,000 swine. The swine go running headlong for the steep place like a cliff, wherein they will end up into the abyss, the sea. So very interesting, and we'll try to understand this as much as we can. what these gospel accounts are telling us, and relate it to Jonah 1 as much as we can, or as much as I can, as much as the Lord allows understanding of these things, and we'll see that yes, these things do fit together. I think we'll begin to understand at least that much.
Thank you for joining us for eBible Fellowship's Evening Bible Studies with your host and Bible teacher, Chris McCann. For more studies and information, visit our website at www.ebiblefellowship.org. Until our next Bible study, may the Lord's perfect will be done.